Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have two questions to the proponents of the bill, and then I would like to express my commentary on the bill. I believe Representative Fox might be able to answer the first one. Just a question in regards to the registry for the individual who has to apply or have to register. It states that, if I'm reading it correctly, a blood sample or a DNA sample might have to be required. Is that accurate? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative McCrory. Representative Fox, do you care to answer?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see we're dealing with the Deadly Weapon Offender Registry, and the question is who has to register. And then with respect to that Section C, which is 874 to 884, there are certain steps that go with registering, such as a photograph of the offender, fingerprinting, and if the offender is required to submit to the taking of a blood sample, then yes, they would be required to. I think that is. Huh? What I'm saying is I do not think it's a new requirement, because actually, as we are aware in this chamber, those who are convicted of felonies do have to submit to a DNA sample anyway. So that's consistent with what the current law would be.
Representative McCrory.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on line 2063, if I'm reading this correctly, it states that criminal possession of ammunition will be considered a Class C felony and 2 years of mandatory minimum. Is that correct?
Representative Fox.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, this is 2063 to 2068. That is correct.
Representative McCrory.
And if we're defining ammunition as a bullet, are we suggesting that if someone who may not be of the proper age, which passed up this legislation, is 21 years old to purchase ammunition, or if someone who's 16 or 17 years old has a bullet on them, they can be charged with a felony with 2 years mandatory minimum sentence? Is that correct, Mr. Speaker, through you?
Representative Fox.
If they are not eligible to have ammunition, Mr. Speaker, then excuse me, Mr. Speaker. This is the criminal possession of ammunition, so it's only if they're ineligible because of their prior conviction of certain offenses, and there's a list of those offenses on the next page.
Representative McCrory.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as we look at those offenses on the second page, it seems like new legislation entails that a criminal offense of a misdemeanor now, such as a altercation, physical altercation, will be designated an offense that will create that individual who has that bullet the opportunity to have that 2-year mandatory minimum. Is that correct through you, Mr. Speaker?
Representative Fox.
If the question is if someone had previously been convicted of one of these crimes that are listed here, and then they are found in possession, which would make them ineligible to possess a firearm, it also does now include ammunition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So
Representative McCrory.
Sorry. Thank you, Senator. So what I'm clear on now is the fact that if an individual had an altercation, which could be designated as a third-degree assault, and after the passage of this legislation, if that individual is found with a bullet, maybe in his car, maybe in possession, that person is deemed a felon and will require a 2-year jail sentence and a mandatory 2-year jail time. Mr. Speaker, and I have no more questions to the proponent of the bill. I guess my commentary on this bill is this. You know, every time we have major legislation for us that requires every single one of us to dig deep into our hearts and decide how we're going to vote on it, I myself always make sure I attend church services before we debate. And this particular piece of legislation, not only did I attend on Sunday, I had a second opportunity to attend on Monday, because this piece of legislation is that important. About a month and a half ago, I had a community forum in my district around the issue of gun violence. And I asked the community to come out and talk to me about solutions around gun violence. I just wanted to have a community dialogue. And that morning before the community conversation, I talked to my aide, and she told me that someone by the name of Nilda Marquez Green had called the office, and another member, Lee, from the Sandy Hook Promise organization, wanted to be a part of that community dialogue in the north end of Hartford. And when I called her back, she was very polite and didn't want to intrude on this community dialogue in the north end of Hartford with myself and many other people from the Capitol who came to that dialogue. We had a police chief, the mayor, former Representative Michael Lawler, Chief State's Attorney's Office, Chief Public Defenders. We had a number of policymakers at this dialogue. And I was kind of hesitant at first because I didn't want to make this a big political event. I really wanted solutions to gun violence in the urban community. But we agreed that she can come, and not only that, I said, I'll give you the opportunity to speak because you just lost your loved one. And not only that, she was born and raised in the city of Hartford. So when the dialogue began, I was confronted by a grandmother who had lost her loved one a few years back. Now, mind you, over the past 10 years in the capital city, we have had over 300 murders. And this grandmother came to me in front of all my colleagues and all those individuals there, and she looked me in my eyes, and she said to me, the only reason why you're here is because of what happened at Sandy Hook. I had no response. It was the first time in my professional and political career that I could not come up with an appropriate response to a constituent. And I was hurt. Because what she said to me was absolutely right. She was on point, and I didn't know how to respond. As the dialogue continued and ended, Nilda Marquez Green spoke so candidly and so openly and so honestly. And what she did was connect the pain, the hurt, the struggle, the empathy and sympathy of the families in Newtown, Connecticut with the families in Hartford, Connecticut. She was outstanding. And I'll never forget the line she said, and it was quoted in the paper. She said that she was overwhelmed and kind of embarrassed by the amount of attention that her family and the families of Newtown receive from people all over this world. And she felt as though it was unfair. And these are her words. It was unfair that the fact, because of the way she lived, the concern and care of everybody in this country and this world was different for the concern and care for that grandmother and the mothers and grandmothers that lived in that North End of Hartford. You couldn't find a dry eye in that church, including myself. She linked those two communities that night forever. She made it real. And I respect her and the families of Newtown, Connecticut for doing that. Because the pain that they felt that December afternoon is the pain that these families have been having in these cities for years. And it is a shame and a sin that I could not respond to that grandmother. And tonight I want to publicly apologize for not being there for those families who lost loved ones year after year after year. And it's not like we haven't tried to change gun laws in Connecticut before this evening. My colleague, Representative Dargan, has said that. But we couldn't get it done. It was stated earlier that we put funding in for the gun trafficking task force. I think that's a good thing. But when that comment was made, it said this will be a strong investment in the inner cities. Now you think about that. We need to fund a gun task force for it to be an investment? No. If you want to invest in these inner cities, invest in the human capital that exists there. Provide opportunity for the young people who are not caught up in this foolishness of gun violence. So when you listen to us, fight for more programs that prevent. When you listen to us, fight for after-school activities. It's because the children who live in those communities do not have the options that others have. And it's no one's fault. That's the ball they was given to play with. It's not like we want something that we don't deserve. What those children want is opportunity. Before I came this morning to session, I had to go to a funeral service. And here's the program. It was a funeral service for a 19-year-old young man that was gunned down last week on Clark Street in Hartford. We had a bloody week in this city, capital city, if anyone noticed it. And I took it upon myself to go to the funeral service. I knew his family. And when I was there, I saw a former student of mine. And before I left, he said to me, "What are you going to do about it?" And I said, "What do you think I should do about it?" He said, "Mr. McCrory, just help the young ones. Just help the young ones." There was over 500 people at that funeral service. And I can guarantee you over 300 were under the age of 21. Many of them live in that same community. Right on the same block where that young man was murdered with a weapon of mass destruction, there's an elementary school. 3 days after that murder, there was another murder on the other block, on Barber Street. Don't you think those children know what happened in their communities? Don't you think those children right now need mental health services right now? Don't those families need counseling right now? Not because we're going to pass this legislation, because once we pass it, yes, sure, we're going to pick and choose who gets the supports. Shame on us for doing that. Shame on us for deciding that after we pass this legislation, some communities will get the supports they need and others won't. God help us if we come to that point. That we're going to pick and choose. It's not right. It's just not right. Mr. Speaker, I wish I had the opportunity to serve on some of these task forces. I wish I had that opportunity. But I didn't. So tonight we have a piece of legislation in front of us. And it's going to pass. And everyone who knows me in here, I'm the most bipartisan person in this legislature. We're going to pass it because we have agreement. And it's going to get signed. And the President of the United States will be at the University of Hartford on Monday. He's going to champion his cause and bring it to Washington, D.C. and see if we can get bipartisan agreement on a larger measure. But if you ask me as an educator, the grade I give to this piece of legislation is incomplete. It's incomplete because it doesn't speak to the issue of gun violence that has permeated our cities in this great state. I will argue that the title of Senate Bill 1160 an act concerning gun violence prevention is a misnomer. Because we don't have $1 of prevention in this bill. Now, we might do something by the end of the session to put funding in for prevention programs that we know work. But tonight, that's not what we're doing. We have an agreement, and everyone's not happy about it. But we're going to pass it. We're going to pat ourselves on the back. And you know what? It may prevent another Newtown from happening. It may prevent or get someone some mental health services. It may make our schools a little safer. But it won't address the core issues of gun violence, illegal guns, opportunity that must be championed. And when we get to that, then I will stand up. And then I'll rally behind every last one of you. And I'll go back to that grandmother and say, my colleagues understand your pain. And never again will we overlook you and come to you when the house is on fire. We'll listen to your concerns before. And we'll craft legislation that support and move you and your children forward. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for giving me this opportunity to express my concerns. And because of that, don't think that I'm against what's in this bill. Because what's in this bill is good. But it doesn't go far enough. And because I am a man of my word and my character, I cannot support it. I cannot support it. Now, we might do something later in the session. I doubt if we do anything else on guns. It's just a little too controversial. But we might do something later. We'll get to the core things that we talked about, that I talked about. But tonight, I can't support it. But you guys do what you have to do. I appreciate your time and your ear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.